The snow fell gently that Christmas Eve, blanketing the quiet streets in a peaceful white silence. Families gathered around warm fires, children whispered prayers before sleep, and the world seemed wrapped in the magic of the season. But in one small town, something happened that would shatter that peace forever. A sound pierced through the cold night air, a desperate, pleading cry that echoed between the houses. One man heard it. He stopped, his breath forming clouds in the frozen air, his heart pounding as the cry came again. Louder this time, more desperate. He stood there, torn between the warmth of his home and the unknown danger lurking in the darkness. And then he made a choice that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Because sometimes the things we choose to ignore become the ghosts that never leave us. Sometimes, turning away from a cry for help means turning away from our own humanity. And on that Christmas Eve, one man learned this lesson in the cruelest way possible. David Morrison had always been a good man. Not a hero, not a saint, just good. He worked at the local hardware store, coached Little League on weekends, and never missed church on Sundays. His neighbors knew him as the guy who'd help you jumpstart your car or lend you his lawnmower without a second thought. At 42 years old, David had built a simple, comfortable life in the small town of Millbrook, where everyone knew everyone, and doors were rarely locked. Christmas Eve of 2019 started like any other holiday evening. David had spent the day with his sister and her family, eating too much, laughing at old memories, and watching his nieces tear through their presents with the impatience only children possess. By 9 o'clock, he was driving home through streets decorated with twinkling lights and inflatable Santas, feeling that warm contentment that comes from good food and family love. The temperature had dropped significantly after sunset, and a light snow had begun to fall, making the roads slick and treacherous. David drove carefully, his old pickup truck rumbling through the quiet neighborhoods. Most houses were dark now, their occupants either asleep or settled in for the night. The radio played soft Christmas carols, and David hummed along, thinking about the hot chocolate waiting for him at home. That's when he heard it. At first, he thought it was an animal, a cat maybe, or a dog caught outside in the cold. The sound was distant, muffled by the snow and wind, but unmistakably a cry of distress. David slowed his truck, turning down the radio to listen more carefully. There it was again, a wailing sound that made his skin prickle with unease. He pulled over to the side of the road near the entrance to Riverside Park, a wooded area that ran along the creek cutting through town. The park was popular during the day with jogging trails and picnic areas, but at night, especially in winter, it was deserted and dark. The crying seemed to be coming from somewhere in those woods. David sat in his truck, engine idling, heat blasting from the vents. His logical mind began working through the possibilities. It could be teenagers playing around trying to scare people. It could be someone's pet that had gotten loose. It could be nothing at all, just the wind playing tricks through the trees. He glanced at the clock on his dashboard, 9:47 p.m. He was tired, cold, and ready to be home. The cry came again, and this time there was no mistaking it. It sounded human, a child maybe, or a woman in distress. David's hand moved to the door handle, then stopped. His heart was racing now, not with the desire to help, but with fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of what might be waiting in those dark woods, fear of getting involved in something dangerous or complicated. He thought about the stories he'd heard on the news, people getting robbed or attacked when they stopped to help stranded motorists, scams where criminals used fake distress to lure good Samaritans into traps. His rational mind told him that getting out of his warm, safe truck to investigate strange noises in a dark park was foolish, maybe even dangerous. David looked at his phone. He could call the police, let them handle it. That would be the smart thing to do. But as his finger hovered over the screen, he hesitated. What if it was nothing? What if he called 911 and wasted their time on Christmas Eve for some kids playing pranks? he'd feel like an idiot. The dispatcher might even be annoyed with him for the false alarm. Another sound cut through the night, fainter this time, weaker. And then silence. David sat there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 2 or 3 minutes. The snow was falling harder now, accumulating on his windshield. The streets were empty. No one else was around to hear what he was hearing, to share the responsibility of this decision. It was just him, alone in his truck, with a choice to make. He made it. David put the truck in gear and drove away. The guilt hit him before he even reached his driveway. It settled in his stomach like a stone, heavy and cold. He told himself he was being smart, being safe. He told himself it was probably nothing. He told himself that if it were really serious, someone else would have heard it too. Someone closer. Someone braver. That night, David barely slept. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl outside. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard that cry. Every time he started to drift off, he jerked awake, his heart pounding, wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake. Christmas morning arrived gray and cold. David went through the motions of his usual holiday routine, coffee, breakfast, more family gatherings. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He kept checking his phone, scrolling through local news, looking for what? He didn't even know. It wasn't until December 26th that he found out. The headline appeared on the Millbrook Gazette's website. Local woman found dead in Riverside Park, foul play suspected. David's blood turned to ice as he read the article. Sarah Chen, a 34-year-old nurse and mother of 2, had been found by a jogger on the morning of the 26th. She was lying near the creek, partially covered by snow. The preliminary investigation suggested she had been attacked on Christmas Eve, sometime between 9:30 and 10 o'clock p.m. She had suffered serious injuries and had likely survived for some time before succumbing to hypothermia and blood loss. The police were asking anyone who had been in the area on Christmas Eve, anyone who had seen or heard anything unusual, to come forward immediately. David couldn't breathe. The room spun around him. The time matched. The location matched. The sound he'd heard wasn't an animal or teenagers or the wind. It was Sarah Chen, fighting for her life, calling for help in the darkness. And he had driven away. For 3 days, David existed in a fog of horror and guilt. He couldn't eat, he couldn't sleep, he couldn't look at himself in the mirror. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw a woman he'd never met lying in the snow, crying out, waiting for someone to help her. Waiting for him to help her. He should have stopped. He should have called the police immediately. He should have done something, anything. Instead, he'd driven home to his warm house, his comfortable bed, while Sarah Chen died alone in the cold. The logical part of his brain tried to reason with him. Even if he had stopped, she might have been too far gone to save. He didn't know exactly where she was. The woods were extensive. By the time he found her, it might have been too late anyway. But these rationalizations rang hollow. The truth was simpler and more painful. He'd been afraid, and his fear had cost someone their life. On the 4th day, David drove to the police station. He walked in with shaking hands and told them everything. About driving by the park, about hearing the cries, about driving away. He expected to be arrested, charged with something, criminal negligence maybe, or failure to render aid. He wanted to be punished. He deserved it. Detective Rodriguez listened to his statement with a grave expression. When David finished, the detective was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. Mr. Morrison, I appreciate you coming forward. This information is helpful for establishing a timeline, but I need to be clear with you. Legally, you didn't do anything wrong. You're not obligated to investigate every strange noise you hear. You're not required to put yourself in danger. But I could have saved her, David whispered, his voice breaking. If I had just... Maybe, Rodriguez interrupted gently, or maybe you would have encountered her attacker and become a victim yourself. We don't know. What we do know is that Sarah Chen was attacked by someone with a knife. It was violent and premeditated. If you had confronted that person alone in the dark, things could have gone very differently. The detective's words were meant to comfort, but they didn't, because David knew the truth that no legal definition could change. He had heard someone dying and had chosen his own comfort over their life. The case made headlines for weeks. Sarah Chen's attacker was eventually caught, a drifter with a violent past. Saint, who had been camping in the woods. He was arrested in a nearby town after trying to use Sarah's credit card. The evidence was overwhelming, and he was convicted of murder. Justice, in the legal sense, was served. But for David Morrison, there was no justice, no closure, no forgiveness. He learned everything about Sarah Chen. She had been driving home from her shift at the hospital when her car broke down near the park. She had been attacked while trying to walk to a nearby gas station to call for help. She left behind a husband and 2 daughters, ages 7 and 9. She had been planning to start nursing school to become a pediatric specialist. She volunteered at the animal shelter. Her friends described her as kind, funny, always ready to help others. David attended her memorial service, standing in the back, unable to stop the tears streaming down his face. He watched her daughters cling to their father, their small faces confused and devastated. He listened to people share stories of Sarah's compassion and generosity, and he carried the weight of knowing that this woman, who had spent her life helping others, had died calling for help that never came. 5 years have passed since that Christmas Eve, and David Morrison is a different man. Not better, not healed, but different. He still lives in Millbrook, though he moved to a different neighborhood, unable to drive past Riverside Park without feeling physically ill. He still works at the hardware store, still goes through the motions of daily life, but the easy contentment he once felt is gone forever. He carries Sarah Chen's memory with him every single day. Her photograph is on his refrigerator, cut from a newspaper article. He donated money to her daughter's college funds anonymously, though no amount of money could ever compensate for what they lost. Every Christmas Eve, he volunteers at the homeless shelter downtown, spending the night serving meals and offering warmth to people who have nowhere else to go. It doesn't erase what happened, nothing ever could, but it's something. David has become hyper-vigilant about helping others now. He stops for every stranded motorist. He investigates every concerning sound. He calls the police about every potential danger he notices, no longer caring if he seems paranoid or foolish. Some might say he's overcompensating, trying to balance cosmic scales that can never be balanced, and they'd be right. The psychological toll has been severe. David sees a therapist twice a month working through the trauma and guilt that consume him. He's been diagnosed with severe anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder. He has nightmares regularly, always the same dream of driving past the park, hearing the cries, making a different choice. In the dreams, he stops, he helps, he saves her, and then he wakes up and reality crashes back down. His story raises questions that have no easy answers. How responsible are we for the suffering we could have prevented but didn't? Where is the line between self-preservation and moral obligation? In a world where we're constantly told to mind our own business, to not get involved, to stay safe, how do we balance those instincts with our basic human duty to help each other? Sarah Chen's family has publicly forgiven the world for not saving her, choosing to focus their energy on honoring her memory through advocacy for women's safety. But David has never forgiven himself. He probably never will, because he knows a truth that haunts him more than any ghost ever could. It only takes a few seconds to make a call. It only takes a moment of courage to try. And in that moment, a life hangs in the balance. On Christmas Eve 2019, David Morrison heard a cry for help and drove away. He didn't commit a crime, he didn't break any laws, but he broke something far more important. The unspoken contract we all share as human beings to care for each other when it matters most. And some things, once broken, can never truly be repaired. They can only be remembered, regretted, and carried forward as a lesson written in sorrow. A lesson about the weight of a single choice and the echoes of silence that last forever.